Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
So, in the days between shows, in between broadcasts of Geek Therapy Radio, the main show, the main stage here, and Midweek Geek that I usually release just as a podcast-only version, in the middle of the week, usually Tuesdays or Wednesdays, sometimes Thursdays. But there are days in between where it may seem like I'm not doing it. I'm not making the show. I'm not recording the segments, and it might seem like I'm not working on the show. But I assure you, the funny thing is, yes, I am working on the show in the days that I'm not actually on the air, that I don't upload a podcast. I'm doing something called show prep. And show prep is something as easy as basically, since my type of show is more geek-related, tech-related, kind of nerdy culture-related, science-related, I keep my ear to the rails, to the train tracks, to hear what's coming down the tracks in the world of geekdom. So I'll check various websites, I'll talk to various people, just keeping my ears open for something that I might find fascinating enough that I might think it might be fascinating to share with you, the listener. Or, you know what, honestly, something that I just think is fascinating for myself. It's Geek Therapy Radio, and sometimes the therapy is just for me. So if it's fascinating to me or fascinating to the audience, that's usually what goes into the show. I make a note of it. I jot it down. For instance, this week was the 30th anniversary of the Nintendo Game Boy, which was released in 1989. July 31st, 1989. We have a meteor shower going on. So keep looking up. I've said on the show many times, not to get too sidetracked, but I've said on the show many times, one of the easiest things that we can do, one of the most perfect geek therapies for us, is to simply look up. Yes, I know, depending on where you're at in Houston when you're receiving this broadcast, that there might be too much light pollution, or you may think there's too much light pollution. Yes, there is too much light pollution. That's true. But you can still see plenty, even in light pollution. You can still see Saturn. I'm talking with your naked eye. You can still see Saturn. You can still see Jupiter. You can still see Venus for sure. That super bright thing in the west around sunset, that's not just the sun, but the super bright little point of light. That's Venus. What other planets can you see that I missed out? Did I say Mars yet? You can see Earth, no matter how light polluted it is. You see the sun, see the moon. So there are things to see up there. You see different stars, see Betelgeuse, see Sirius, see... the Big Dipper is pretty easy to see. The constellations are fairly easy to see, the brighter constellations. There's plenty to look up to. And it's not something that, look up there and have... And learn about. Yes, you can learn about where the constellation... Big Dipper, how it got the name Big Dipper. Yes, you can learn about the orbital whatever of Mars. But the big thing is, the reason why I say look up is it's a good way of taking yourself out of yourself, if that makes any sense. And we're in such a busy world. Our lives are so busy. We have kids, we have jobs, we have stress. But every once in a while, just for a minute, if possible, if you're traveling, if you're on a job site and you have the luxury of just, walking to the next thing and just kind of look up at the stars while you're making your way across a parking lot, just look up. It's very cathartic, and it helps me at least, and I'm sure it helps a lot of other people feel grounded, get grounded again, and humbled. Really humbled, looking out there and just thinking about the star that you're looking at, the little point of light, and thinking that could be a star that's surrounded by planets. It most likely is surrounded by planets. And in the grand scale of the universe, what if there is intelligent life orbiting that star? What if they're looking back towards my star and wondering if anything looking back at them? I'm saying you can go down these mental rabbit trails that really help. To me, it helps center me. It helps to calm me. At first, it may seems scary to a lot of people. It might make you feel insignificant. I hear a lot of people saying, when I think about the universe, it makes me feel insignificant. For me, it makes me feel, once you get over that irrational fear that you're insignificant, it makes you feel special that you are part of the universe right here and now. In that, theoretically, with a powerful enough telescope on a distant planet somewhere, that intelligent life could look with a powerful enough telescope at you, because time is space, and theoretically you never die. That's really trippy to think about. That if there's a powerful enough telescope on a planet 1,000 light years away that's looking at us right now, they're seeing human civilization 1,000 years ago. And planets are a varying distance away from our solar system, means that depending on when someone is looking through their telescope at us, you're still alive. Isn't that trippy? That's super trippy and super cool to think about. I really wasn't planning on going down this tangent, and this all comes together with what I was talking about with show prep. Sometimes I go through the week and I notice little things, little stories that I think I want to talk about, but when I wind up getting behind the microphone, I'm rest assured that even if there's nothing to talk about, there's always something to talk about. Because if you have a curious heart and a curious mind, it doesn't matter what lull we seem to be in with geek news or technology or anything like that. And believe me, we're not in a lull. It's very rare that the tech world and the geek world and the science world is ever in a lull. But if you think that we are in a lull, if you think this week was a little bit boring on the geek front, if you have a curious heart and a curious mind, it really wasn't. Basically, if there's nothing in geek news to get your attention, maybe you can look another direction and you kind of notice things that you may have missed if you're bombarded by all the articles of geek news and tech news. Maybe you look to something in your own life that you own or in around you or at work. I don't even know. You look at a plant outside of your office window and you wonder about photosynthesis, and it gets you on a jargon. Sooner or later, you're on Wikipedia, or you're busting out your old Encyclopedia Britannica, depending on your age and demographic, and you're learning all about photosynthesis, and it just comes from a curious heart. So whether you're looking up at the stars, looking up like I encourage you to do, or just noticing things in your world around you, stay curious, and there's always something to discover and explore. I'm going to have my friend Andrew on the show later. He's a coworker. He's going to have some advice for geeks. It's going to be really fun. We'll probably do that in the last segment. But stick around. There's more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. There's actually some stuff I want to get to. Some real stuff. So don't go anywhere. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Stick around. It's going to be fun. You know what I'm going to try to do? Here's the experiment I'm going to try to do. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio, by the way. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. You know what I'm going to try to do this show is not try to rely on the different articles and different things that I found in geek news this week. Yes, there are things. And by the way, Midweek Geek, if you subscribe to the podcast, which you should, it's just called Geek Therapy Radio. But the podcast exclusive I release in the middle of the week is called Midweek Geek. In Midweek Geek, I did talk about the new Galaxy Tab S6. It's going up directly against the iPad Pro. And I waxed and waned and went over the woes and cons and what else did I call it? Pros and whatevers. Woes and cons. Anyways, I talked about the Galaxy S6. That's a big release. Samsung Galaxy Tab S6. That's kind of big news. Does it belong in the in the world? Android tablets sales are suffering. Is it going to not dethrone, but make an impact in the market versus the iPad Pro, which it is directly competing against? I don't know. You'll have to download or subscribe to the podcast to find out my thoughts on that. The answer to TLDR is, I don't know. It's really, I don't know. It's up to you. Point is, I did talk about something poignant this week. There's plenty of poignant things, but this radio show this week, I just want to be therapeutic with myself, and maybe it might be therapeutic for you too. Or maybe your stress level's going up by the tone of my voice and camber and cadence. Really, what I want to talk about in this segment, it popped into my head as I'm perusing through articles, is my wife asked me an interesting question the other week, and why it dawned on me out of nowhere. Actually, it's not out of nowhere, because I've been tampering with a lot of emulators recently, and by emulators, I mean I've been on this Windows 3.1 kick. So I use this emulator called DOSBox, which allows you to emulate legacy MS-DOS programs. For the more astute computer geeks among us, it is super hard to run old software. That's what legacy basically means. Old software from Windows 3.1, 95, Windows 95, and Windows 98. It's hard to run it on modern computers. But so you need an emulator. You need to emulate DOS because computers don't have DOS anymore. Windows does not run on top of DOS. So I use a DOS emulator called DOSBox. You should download it. It is awesome. You should find a copy of Windows 3.1, the 6 discs, or get it by other methods that I am not a police officer, and run Windows 3.1 just for nostalgia's sake. I've also been running Atari ST emulators. I have an Atari ST, but I've been running a Hatari on my Android tablet and on my main computer, my gaming PC. Last week, or recently, I talked to Clint from Lazy Game Reviews on YouTube. Go back. Another reason you should subscribe to the podcast version of Geek Therapy Radio. I was talking to him about Computer Reset there in Dallas. It is a treasure trove of old technology, old 286 computers, 386, 486 Pentium, 1, 2, 3, 4, Core 2 Duo, all the way through history. IBM compatibles, IBM 5150, Tandy PC Juniors, reel-to-reel mainframes. It is a really cool place, and this is a roundabout way of getting to the interesting question my wife asked me, because I told her, I said, I need to get up to Dallas so that I can pick through this. I want a 286 computer, or 386, or 486, or all three. Just at least one representative of that early 90s, perhaps latest 80s era. I want a 286 computer at least, running MS-DOS. Probably want a 386 because that's what's going to run Windows 3.1 better than a 286. But I said I really want a 5150, an IBM 5150, which is by and large widely regarded as the first personal computer. It was marketed as the first personal computer. So my wife asked me, why do you want that stuff? What and at first, I got to be honest, I felt a little defensive. I thought it was it's just more crap to clutter up the apartment or the house whenever we move. That's how I took it. So she's very calm, and she explained, no, it's not. And I'm not saying this to be critical of you. I just want to understand, as somebody who is not into old computers nor has any fascination by it really, what it is about that appeals to you. And so she wants to relate to me. She's a good wife. I freaking love Sarah. She wants to know about me, what makes me tick. It's a beautiful thing. So in that regard, once the question changed, once my concept of the question changed to, you just want to understand where I'm coming from, not come down on me or be criticize me for any of these things. Why do I want a 5150? And it's something that I never tried to articulate into words before. It's just something that I felt. Talking to Clint from Lazy Game Reviews, I think he understands my passion for it and a lot of our passion for things like this. There's an old stove in a house we're looking at, and I would like to keep the old stove and oven because I like the analog clock and I like the chrome dials and everything like that. And we like the way the plastic feels. It's not an OCD thing. It's just an appreciation, because I don't want to belittle people with actual OCD. It's just when I make videos on YouTube, for instance, when I'm displaying an old piece of gear like a Commodore 64, or even a new piece of gear like an Xbox 360 Bluetooth controller, which there's a video in the works about that coming up. It's the perfect Bluetooth controller. But I like to get these close-up macro shots so that you can see the texture of the plastic. I want you to feel like you can smell it. And smell is another big thing. The smell of old computers. The smell of opening a new computer. Clint put it a good way. It's like the smell of a new car. A lot of people like the smell of a new car. Either way, it's a very visceral thing. The texture of plastic, the texture of metal, the feel of it, the sounds that it makes. So I want a 386 computer or a 5150, which predates 286, obviously. But I like the feel of clicking that clasp down on the 5 1/4 inch floppy drive. I loved my first computer that I ever used and was in school in the computer lab as an Apple II. Apple IIe, Apple IIc, various iterations of the Apple II. Many people's first experience with a personal computer was the Apple II, which came out after, wait a second, around the same time as the IBM 5150. Remember, IBM 5150 was marketed as a personal computer from the get-go. Don't remember it quite how the Apple II, doesn't matter. That's a discussion for another day, but they all came around the same time. I'm just saying my first experience with computers was with the Apple II, and I like taking that Number Crunchers or Word Crunchers disc, or better yet, the Oregon Trail by MECC, who made all those games. I like to take that 5 1/4 inch floppy disk, which back then they were actually floppy. That's why they were called floppy disks. The texture, that raised kind of rough texture of the floppy disk. I like sliding it into the slot. It was very cathartic feeling to slide the disc in there perfectly, and it fits perfectly, a perfectly fitting thing. And then you do the latch, and the latch kind of grabs at the last second. It pulls itself down into that down position. It's all very visceral, and it ingrains itself into your psyche, and therefore there's a big nostalgia for it. I remember being 7 years old and playing Oregon Trail, and at the time I wasn't thinking about the texture of the disc or the smell of the computer or reaching behind it to do a hard boot or doing a warm boot or the sounds that it make. It wasn't entering my brain that in that time, but it did enter my brain and it did stick with me. So I equate those sounds and feelings and textures and smells to simpler times. Also, it's just fascinating. As you grow older, I appreciate the cutting edge of 2019 because I learn more about where we came from. And I want it like a museum. I want examples of that. I don't want to fill the house with it. I'm not going to hoard this stuff, but I want examples from each era. In a way, I love it. And maybe I'll expand more on this in the next segment. Stick around, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I want to go back to something I mentioned in the previous segment where I was confuzzled about the Apple II and the IBM 5150 when they came out in relation to each other. I was absolutely correct in that they came out in the late 70s, early 80s. The Apple II came out in 1977 specifically. I did not mention that in the past segment. And the IBM 5150 came out in September of 1981. So the 5150 came out 4 years after the Apple II. It was the first MS-DOS PC, whereas the Apple II was still running BASIC, the basic programming language, the basic architecture, but similar to the Commodore 64 and other Commodore computers and Apple computers. The basic programming language was ubiquitous in the late 70s and early 80s, but the 5150 had an operating system. Not that BASIC wasn't an operating system, but it had the first Microsoft operating system in the form of MS-DOS. So, 5150 was the first IBM personal computer, or PC. I think that is the first time we started to refer to computers as PCs, personal computers. And everything after that, the IBM compatibles. When you wrote software, bought software, you'd see on the box all the system requirements. IBM compatible 286 or higher, 386 or higher. Later, like MMX technology, or you need 4 megabytes of video memory, and you need at least 256 kilobytes of RAM, or whatever. Oh, what glorious times. And that's why, and I so much more appreciate that now. It's a funny thing. And to remind those of you just joining us, I made a bet with myself, a challenge to myself at the beginning of the show, just to go off the cuff, because it's good geek therapy for me, and this is Geek Therapy Radio. And I know that by me mentioning all these things that I'm getting into, that a lot of you are resonating with it. A lot of you remember this stuff. So, have you noticed, speaking of old computers and why I appreciate old computers, because it helps me appreciate the cutting edge. That said, on the cutting edge, now with our tablets and our smartphones and the increase of virtual reality, which hasn't expanded as fast as we were led to believe it would 4 years ago. I mean, VR has always been there since, probably the 70s, at least, in military applications and training. I remember going to Dave & Buster's in like 1992 and playing VR arcade machines. So VR has always kind of been there, but it hasn't escalated. It was supposed to be a few years ago. The VR is just going to be the way we all interact with the world now, in Google Glass and all that kind of stuff. And it hasn't really taken off because it's too cumbersome. As of right now, the technology is too cumbersome. You need very powerful equipment to run it. And it's just... It's a weight on your head currently. It doesn't feel natural, doesn't look natural. It's still really cool. I freaking love my Oculus. But it's just the VR is not there yet. But the point I'm making here is VR, tablets, computers, streaming, Netflix, and how effortlessly it integrates into our lives, our Alexas, our Google Homes, Nest thermostats. Like, the way technology has permeated our lives, it's become such an extension of us that it's making us extremely impersonal. We can't look each other in the eye anymore, it seems. It seems like to look someone in the eye, a stranger in the eye, reach out and shake their hand, is an alien thing to us because they aren't on a screen. And kids being raised seeing their relatives only on a screen. We are only yet to see, we're only beginning to see any sort of effects that being raised with a front of a tablet is going to have on kids. And I don't mean by content they're consuming, because it's mostly cartoons and it's YouTube Kids and it's little silly games. I grew up with video games, the old Nintendo. But to play with other people and interact with other people, we had to have other people in the room, and we would still much rather go out to the cul-de-sac and play baseball than be cooped up inside all day playing Nintendo. Not that we didn't play our share of Nintendo, but it seems to me I remember for every hour played playing Nintendo intensely, there was 2 or 3 hours outside. And it wasn't, my parents didn't have to force us to do it. Maybe it's because the technology of old 8-bit video games, it was very fun to play, but you didn't feel like you were in it. It wasn't photorealistic like it is now. Photorealism in video games, I think that has a major effect on how people relate to the real world. So if you are looking at a screen and you're using Marco Polo or Skype or whatever, FaceTime, and you're just looking at people on screens all day long, and then you go to work and you're staring at a screen all day long, so much what we do. I ask Alexa to turn on my stereo. You can ask her to turn on your lights. Technology has become so pervasive and invasive at the same time. We're like frogs boiling in the water, so to speak. So, by technology getting so much more powerful and so much more prevalent around us, it almost makes it's not magic anymore. That's what I'm looking for. That's the idea that I'm looking for. Technology, to me at least, isn't magic anymore, like it was as late as the 90s. I would say around the mid-2000s, technology stopped being magic. And I'll bring I'll make the point like this. An example. Apple comes out with a new iPad that's 10 times more powerful than whatever. No one cares. It's not magic. It doesn't fill you with wonder. Versus if you took the very first iPhone, the very first smartphone, and you went back to 1985, 1988 or so, if you went to 1988, they'd say, this is Star Trek stuff. This is from Star Trek Next Generation. It would be baffling. You would be burned at the stake probably still in the late 80s if you had a tablet, a screen, and someone else had one you can communicate across the world, and you just started to explain to them what it is. And, and it's a really good point I'm making here, because at that time, let's say late 80s, we did have modems. We did have email, yes, in a more limited way that we have now, of course, but we did have ways to communicate with the world. We had phones that could communicate across the oceans. We did have major companies, huge companies, did have video conferencing. That was a thing, but it was huge and cumbersome and bulky and hard to set up and all around terrible compared to today, but it was still magic. Getting your first Nintendo or Atari 2600, and you're playing adventure. You're just a little block on a screen, and I call it screen vomit. There's 2 or 3 colors on the screen, and it's supposed to represent a maze or a room, and you, the character, are just a little block, but your imagination took you there. And it was magic to be able to manipulate in real time something on a television screen. So it was magic when the Nintendo came out with the better graphics. How did they do this? This is almost like the arcade. By the time the Super Nintendo came around, it was also magic. The bit wars, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, all that stuff of the 90s, it was all magic. The PlayStation was such a vast departure with its 3D rendering from what we previously knew with the Super Nintendo. By the way, Super Nintendo and Sony were teaming up to make the PlayStation, but the deal fell through. Sony went their own way to create their own video game system, which now we know as the PlayStation. Point is, every time a new piece of technology would roll out from, I would say, the dawn of the computer age in the 50s, late 40s, to the early 2000s, it was so much magic. There was a lot of magic there and wonder. Now there's no more magic. I don't feel the magic anymore. So I look back to the old things to remember the magic I felt when I got my first Game Boy, or I saw the first Nintendo, or I stood in the Target aisle looking up at Nintendo cartridges and playing the little tester demo in front of the shelves. So it's not that me collecting things like that. Like, I just put a thing on my Instagram, Geek Therapy Radio on Instagram, by the way, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Game Boy. I put in a line, all the generations of Game Boy, arguably leading to the Nintendo Switch, which a Nintendo Switch can be a handheld device. That is why I loosely categorized it in with the progress of Game Boy. Since the Switch is the only thing right now. It's not like the Wii and the Switch. It's the Switch is the only thing, and it's the handheld and the console in one. Anyways, the reason why I go back to the old Game Boy and why I go back to old computers and why I go back to messing around with the Windows 3.1 or writing YouTube scripts in Windows 3.1 or on the Atari ST isn't because I want to escape, isn't because I want to get into my DeLorean and go back to 1985 or 1988 or 1989 or 1993, whatever, and see Mortal Kombat for the first time. I don't want to go back there. I just want to appreciate it like I wasn't able to appreciate it, or appreciate it like I remember appreciating it back then. Because I don't appreciate new iPads. I don't appreciate new graphics cards. Wow, it's better than the old one, but there's no magic there anymore. It's not revolutionary anymore. So I like going back to remember things that were revolutionary. Does that make sense? Probably. We'll be back with more Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Quick reminder, subscribe, like, follow, blah-bitty blah, all the stuff on social media and YouTube. It's Geek Therapy Radio. Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio, Instagram, Geek Therapy Radio, Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio, YouTube. Can I tell you about a website? I have a big announcement at the end of this segment, actually a pretty huge announcement at the end of this segment. But first, I had a website idea, and my wife hates it. She thinks it's really stupid, and I know she's getting nervous if she's listening to this. She's thinking, am I actually going to say it to the radio audience in a city of 6 million people? Am I actually going to tell them my stupid website idea? Yes, honey, I am. I love you with all of my heart, but I am going to tell the entire universe, because these electromagnetic waves broadcast throughout space and time, about my stupid website idea. And the reason I'm going to tell everyone about it is because it is $1 million idea, but let me just tell you what it is. I have this idea for a website, and I want to call it something. I want to call it something like PooTube, POOTOOB, something like that. And basically, what it is. Oh, this is really stupid. My mother-in-law is going to text me about this probably, but PooTube, I want it to be an app or something. It can easily be developed into an app, and all it is just a big record button and a leaderboard, like a ranking, like an old arcade machine. First place ASS, second place Rad, third place Tom, fourth place Ned, fifth place AAAA. But it's going to be a leaderboard like that, except with real screen names, and they will be fake for a reason that you'll understand shortly. But it's just a big red button and a leaderboard that you can vote on, that you can thumbs up or thumbs down, give a +1, give a negative, vote. So there's always a leaderboard who has the best votes. And it's a big red record button, and I think you know where I'm getting with this. PooTube. So it's just a big red record button. You record your farts. You feel a juicy jankin' one coming on, and it's simple. Boo! You can make a hotkey on your phone, because we all have phones with good microphones in them. Your friends aren't going to want to use your phones if you have that app, because they'll know what you've been using it for. But BUTT, you press the big red button, let her rip, and it's automatically blip. It's put there for people to upvote or downvote. For whatever reason, people, they like the cut of your jib. They like that one might have sounded medical in nature. They might wonder about your well-being. You might have crackled their speakers on their own phone. But just simple interface, red button, let her rip, and you see how you stack up on the leaderboard. Stink your way up to first place. PooTube. It's $1 million idea, and I just told the entire world. Please cut me in on it. I should patent it right now. Maybe I won't create the thing, but I'll patent it, so you have to pay me for it. It might already exist. It's 2019, and humanity is what humanity is, so it might already exist. And the reason why my wife had such a problem with it is, well, the way I phrased it, I would say, would you be morally opposed to getting filthy rich off of farts? I mean, you can access the website to listen to the stuff, but if you want to compete, if you want to hang with the big dogs and submit your own, it's $1. It should be $2 a month, actually. This is the greatest idea in the world. See, that would be actual technology that would reinstill the wonder into our hearts and into our farts. That would be actual sorcery. This would be, I would feel the same wonder. If that app came out, I would feel the same wonder as when I first saw a 16-bit game, when I first saw Super Mario World for the first time. Wow. There's an app that records toots. Okay, so the big news I have to announce, and I'll lead it. I'll kind of end things here because we're going to hear from Andrew, my coworker and friend Andrew. He has some advice for all us geeks out there. The big news that I have, if you didn't already change the station with all the tootie talk, over on Sports Talk 790, they have greenlit an esports and gaming podcast hosted by yours truly. I say podcast because we're seeing how it goes, because it could potentially become an actual radio show in addition to the podcast. esports is severely underrepresented on local Houston radio waves. We have a sports talk station, Sports Talk 790. So I floated the idea of an esports talk show over the weekend, just an hour over the weekend. So it's not like you're going to tune into 790 and hear Matt Thomas or Andy Kalu or any of the main guys over there, Adam Clayton, all the guys over there. You're not going to hear them talking about a dedicated segment to esports. No, we're not there yet. But esports is growing massively. It's on TVs at the bar. It's on broadcast TVs, TBS. It's all over the place. It's growing, and it's not represented well at all on Houston airwaves. So they've given me the green light to put the podcast over on Sports Talk 790's podcast page. It's going to be called Game Changer Radio, because that's what we're hoping to do here, represent esports on the actual radio. But we're starting it out with a podcast, kind of see what the numbers do, what the interest is generated with that. And we're going to be airing promos for it, yes, on the air. Promos for the podcast, little 15-second promos, 30-second promos, whatever, for Game Changer Radio podcast that you can find on Sports Talk 790. It's not there yet. We'll probably make it live next week, make the podcast live next week, download it next week. But Game Changer Radio on Sports Talk 790, it's happening, hosted by yours truly. I'm super stoked about it. Let's hear from Andrew and his geek catharsis. This is good. I already listened to it.
Hey Johnny, what's up? This is Andrew, and I am one of Johnny's fellow co-workers at KTRH and KPRC, and I have a confession to make to you. I'm a fellow geek. And the things which I've been geeking out about recently are drawing, lucha libre, and Googie / mid-century architecture and design. And my big secret about how to become a better geek is, wait for it, the internet. Big shocker, I know. And sometimes when I'm out searching the internet, I just get overwhelmed by all the information that is in front of me. I don't know where to go. It's kind of like a squirrel with a pile of nuts trying to figure out which nut to bury first. I just get overwhelmed sometimes. And in my path to becoming a better geek, a better artist, a better lucha fan, whatever it is, I try to have one or two trusted sources that I can always either ask them, hey, what do I need to do in this situation? Or they can lead me towards someone else who can make me a better artist. And two guys that I use quite a bit on my path to better geekdom are the Etherington brothers. They're comic book artists and writers from the UK, and they're pretty well established, and they have a wealth of knowledge about how to become better artists and writers. And what did they do with that information? They have decided to make free tutorials for folks to use in order to become better artists. For me, that was great because I can focus, I can use their tutorials to become better art, and I can use their tutorials to become a better artist. And not only do they provide free tutorials, they will give you links to other folks who have great tips in order for you to become a better, greater, huger geek. Huger is probably not a word. And what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to tell you is either become a good source for others to help them along their path to geekdom, or find somebody that you know is a trusted source, a great friend who either has an answer for you or can lead you to someone else so you can become a better geek. So keep geeking out, everybody. This is Andrew, and see you later.
Thank you for listening this week. Be good to yourselves and others. Be a good geek to yourself. Be a good geek to others. Don't be afraid to reach out to fellow geek for help. And don't be afraid to reach out and help a fellow geek.